Recent polling shows that Americans are worried about the cost of food. In fact, 53% say grocery prices are a major stress.
North America is shaking. The trade war between the United States and Canada, once touted by Donald Trump as the hammer that would break Ottawa's economy, has turned into a weapon against Washington itself. A staggering $37 trillion national debt now hangs over the United States like a guillotine. Grocery prices are climbing, fuel is spiraling out of control, and household goods have become unbearable burdens for millions of families. And it all stems from one disastrous decision, a 35% tariff strike that was supposed to cripple Canada, yet today it is suffocating the American economy. The impact of these tariffs is no longer theoretical. Americans are not just reading about inflation in the headlines, they are living it, feeling it in their grocery receipts, their utility bills, and every gallon of gas they pump. The supply chain has become a vice, tightening from both ends. Importers can't cope, retailers are slashing orders, and workers, they are paying the ultimate price with layoffs and shrinking hours. The once strong labor market is beginning to fracture.
We don't make a lot of money. Now, I can't absorb, if all of a sudden there's a 50% tariff on something or even a 25%, I can't absorb all of that.
But while Washington stumbles, Ottawa has turned crisis into opportunity. Canada did not collapse under American pressure. Instead, it doubled down, expanding ports, upgrading rail lines, and building new logistics corridors to siphon away trade that once flowed south. This pivot has transformed Canada from a dependent partner into a rising trade hub, where U.S. corporations now find themselves reacting instead of dictating. And Ottawa didn't stop there. Canada reached south, forging a new economic corridor with Mexico, deliberately cutting Washington out of the equation. Massive pension giants known as the Maple Eight, with trillions of Canadian dollars under management, are pouring investment into Mexico's infrastructure, renewable energy, and ports. This isn't a defense anymore. This is an offensive strike, a calculated reshaping of North America's trade backbone.
He was going to remake from an American perspective, how global trade worked. It had not worked to America's benefit. It was hollowing out our middle class. It was hollowing out our manufacturing.
Looming over it all is a silent weapon, energy. The United States remains heavily dependent on Canadian crude, locked into pipelines, refinery configurations, and contracts that cannot be swapped out overnight. Ottawa now holds the key to America's energy security. Any attempt by Washington to retaliate would immediately ricochet back, exploding fuel prices and sparking chaos at home. Canada doesn't even need to flex muscle, it just needs to keep producing, and Washington remains chained. Meanwhile, multinational corporations are quietly shifting their bases from the U.S. to Canada. Tech firms, manufacturers, even research centers are moving north to escape unpredictable tariffs and chaos in U.S. policy. In just 1 year, Canadian exports to the U.S. dropped from 78% to 68%, a historic plunge, as Ottawa pushed deeper into Asia, Europe, and Latin America. The ports of Los Angeles and New York are losing traffic. Vancouver, Halifax, and Toronto are absorbing it instead. The trade map of North America has been redrawn, and the United States is no longer at the center. For decades, Washington wielded its dominance by dictating when, where, and how trade moved across the continent. That power is slipping. Every container rerouted to Canadian ports, every corporation relocating to Canadian soil, chips away at the foundation of U.S. influence. America's indispensable position is no longer guaranteed. Ottawa has seized the initiative, and the longer tariffs stay in place, the deeper this shift becomes. Here's the brutal truth. The 35% tariff strike was not just a failure, it was a self-inflicted wound. The American people are paying the price every single day, through skyrocketing grocery bills, through jobs lost, through an economy that no longer sets the rules but chases them. Canada, on the other hand, has not only survived, it has risen to claim the role of North America's new commercial center. The chilling question remains, will America accept the role of follower, or will it escalate this trade war at the cost of even greater suffering? And if this shift continues, history may record that it was populist miscalculations and reckless tariffs that handed Ottawa the North American economic crown.
President, you gain 10 times more income for the average family than Joe Biden is because of your policies.
And that's taken into consideration COVID, which a lot of times you don't have to do that.
Prices are starting to rise for American consumers as President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs on nearly all imported goods are kicking in.
In just a few months, the United States has witnessed an unprecedented wave of supermarket closures. Walmart, the symbol of affordable groceries, is pulling out of dozens of communities, leaving behind sprawling food deserts where residents must drive for miles just to buy milk or a bundle of fresh vegetables. On the surface, the reason seems simple: falling sales, rising costs. But behind the scenes lies a tangled chain of causes, from President Trump's new tariff policies to escalating trade friction with Canada and Mexico to the cold, calculated profit strategies of retail giants. The Trump administration slapped new import tariffs on a wide range of food and consumer products under the banner of protecting domestic production. But the truth is, many of these products simply cannot be produced in sufficient quantities in the U.S., especially fresh produce, fruits, and certain meats.
Instagram video by Mercedes Chandler shows price tags torn off old prices. $6.98 shirts now $10.98. Backpacks up from $19.97 to $24.
When tariffs hit, import prices surged by 20 to 50%. Retailers were forced to either raise shelf prices or cut supply. Walmart, whose empire is built on the promise of low prices, faced an ugly choice: accept historically low profit margins or pull out of low-profit markets. They chose the latter. Canada, America's largest agricultural partner, retaliated with tighter import standards, from quarantine checks to traceability requirements to new permits, making it harder for U.S. goods to enter the Canadian market. Mexico seized the moment to strike deals with alternative suppliers, cutting its dependence on American farm products. The fallout was brutal. Millions of tons of goods piled up in storage, farm prices collapsed, but retail prices still rose due to distribution costs and tariffs stacked on top of each other. For Walmart, especially in low-income areas, the math didn't work. The easiest way to stop the bleeding? Close the doors. Walmart is not a charity. Every store runs on a strict profit formula. When logistics costs soared, thanks to tariffs and higher fuel prices, and consumer spending dropped due to inflation, rural and small-town locations became liabilities.
You're absorbing the cost right now.
I'm absorbing the cost.
Will you continue to absorb the cost?
No, I won't. I can't afford to.
Corporate boards look at spreadsheets, not community maps. The result? Entire towns lost their only affordable source of fresh groceries with a single network restructuring announcement. Tariffs, higher import costs, higher retail prices, lower consumer spending, shrinking profit margins, store closures, the birth of food deserts. In states like Arkansas, Ohio, and New Mexico, the nearest supermarket is now 30 to 50 miles away. Residents are left relying on convenience stores, which mostly sell processed foods, snacks, and canned goods, fueling a rise in diabetes, heart disease, and malnutrition. Trump frames this as a tough strategy to win trade advantages, but governors and mayors call it shooting ourselves in the foot. They warn that slapping tariffs and triggering retaliatory measures without strengthening domestic distribution systems is a recipe for localized food crises. The tension is clear. Washington plays geopolitical chess, while small-town America pays with empty shelves and rising grocery bills. The truth is, you don't need a hurricane or a drought to spark a food crisis. All it takes is a string of policy decisions and corporate strategies made without regard for the people they affect. From the White House to Walmart's boardroom, the numbers on a balance sheet have outweighed the basic human need for a meal. And when the last store in town shuts its doors, a food desert is no longer an abstract term. It's your home address. So here's the question: when policymakers and market giants treat your dinner table as just another data point, who will stand up for your right to eat?
We want to send a strong signal to the rest of Canada and to the world that Canada is not divisible.
I have always said that I support Alberta's sovereignty within a united Canada, and I think that is the viewpoint of many of the premiers.
Canada is in the midst of a political earthquake. After Ottawa flatly rejected any possibility of negotiating provincial autonomy or secession, the western provinces, led by Alberta and Saskatchewan, have unleashed an unprecedented counteroffensive. This is no longer about complaints or symbolic protests. This is a soft secession strategy, rewriting laws, restructuring the balance of power, and acting as if the Federation is nothing more than a name on paper. The Prime Minister's message was clear. The Constitution offers no path for provinces to leave the Federation, and national unity is non-negotiable. But instead of calming the situation, his words were seen in the West as arrogance and dismissive.
Part of the conversation is about the amazing opportunities for Alberta today and for Canada today to build.
In Alberta and Saskatchewan, frustration has been simmering for years over tightened federal energy policies, unfair distribution of federal funds, and the feeling of being abandoned in national decision-making. Within 48 hours of Trudeau's statement, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and even Manitoba issued a joint declaration. If Ottawa won't discuss autonomy, they will act as an autonomous bloc. Their plan includes coordinated management of resources and infrastructure, synchronizing legislation and budgets to reduce federal influence, exploring the creation of a regional trade authority inspired by blocs like the EU's Schengen Agreement.
The Premier has repeatedly said she supports Alberta staying in Canada, but she and her Justice Minister have called on Elections Alberta to let the vote go ahead so the people can decide.
Relying on Section 92 of the Constitution Act, which grants provinces control over resources, education, and certain economic areas, they are pushing the limits of provincial authority as far as legally possible. Provincial sovereignty laws allowing provinces to refuse enforcement of federal legislation deemed harmful to provincial interests. Creation of the Western Energy Consortium to take full control of approving oil, gas, and renewable energy projects, cutting out federal agencies. Direct negotiations with U.S. states like Montana, Texas, and North Dakota, opening trade offices in Houston and Washington, D.C. Exploring independent policing, pension funds, and security models to reduce dependence on national systems. Ottawa initially dismissed this as symbolic politics, but the speed and coordination of the Western strategy have forced the federal government to adjust, even considering changes to equalization payments to ease tensions. Yet the West's response has been cold. The era of symbolic gestures is over. They want structural reform, not promises. This is not an outright secession, but the construction of independent infrastructure within the shell of the Federation. If Ottawa remains firm, escalation scenarios could include withholding or reducing federal transfer payments, launching mass legal challenges to delay federal policies, slowing the flow of energy and agricultural products to the east. At that point, the debate will no longer be a theoretical unity versus separation argument, but the practical reality of self-governance and forcing Ottawa to negotiate. The Canadian Federation is facing an unprecedented stress test. Alberta and Saskatchewan aren't talking about leaving, they are living as if they already have. Laws, the economy, diplomacy, all are being reshaped so that power begins in the West, not in Ottawa. The question now is not, will Ottawa concede, but will Ottawa bend or break under this pressure? Whatever the outcome, Canada will never be the same again.
Welcome back. Canada is looking to boost trade with other North American trading partners, namely Mexico, as both countries try to work out a trade agreement with the volatile U.S. under President Trump.
We have always said that we will apply tariffs where they had the maximum impact in the United States and a minimum impact in Canada.
In Mexico City, a closed-door meeting between senior Canadian and Mexican officials is underway. On the surface, it looks like a routine trade discussion, but behind those closed doors lies a bold strategy to forge a tighter alliance in order to counter Washington's unpredictable tariff strikes. Canada now sees Mexico not just as a trade partner, but as a strategic lever, a bargaining chip to force the United States back to the negotiating table. Within the North American trade bloc, USMCA/CUSMA, Mexico is more than just a participant. It is a back door into the U.S. market.
Two Canadian ministers traveled to Mexico City to meet with the president that got that extension and is yet to retaliate against Trump.
Canada's core industries, mining, energy, banking, and tourism, can connect directly with Mexico, creating supply chains that loop around the United States. If Washington erects tariff walls, Ottawa can still rely on bilateral agreements with Mexico to keep goods and services flowing, without depending entirely on U.S. goodwill.
Let's be clear. Canada does not dump lumber into the United States. And we will continue to make the case that these current and proposed duties are unjustified.
Recently, Mexico received a 90-day reprieve before new U.S. tariffs take effect. Canada did not. This creates a strategic opening. Mexico is currently in a position where Washington is applying less pressure. By strengthening ties now, Canada can tap into Mexico's advantage, slipping into negotiation channels that the U.S. still keeps open, and break the isolation Washington has been trying to impose. Canada has chosen a direct, confrontational approach, strong pushback, retaliatory tariffs, and public opposition to Washington's trade policies. Mexico, on the other hand, has chosen to keep quiet and concede on certain demands, such as tightening border security, to avoid open conflict.
So you're saying that Canada's not respecting that agreement, that trade agreement?
Well, I think they'd be the first ones to admit that. I mean, it's not respecting.
If managed skillfully, these two approaches could form a diplomatic pincer. Canada plays the hardliner, Mexico plays the conciliator, forcing the U.S. to recalibrate its stance to avoid a complete fracture in the North American bloc. protecting North American supply chains, keeping trilateral trade flowing even under new U.S. tariffs, boosting cross-investment, encouraging Mexico to invest in Canada, particularly in food processing, energy, and banking, adding political pressure on Washington, expanding influence, using Mexico as a bridge into South American markets, helping Canada diversify exports and reduce dependence on the U.S. This strategy carries serious risks. If Washington realizes Canada is using Mexico as a workaround to bypass tariffs or gain leverage, the backlash could be severe. Heavier tariffs, stricter measures in sensitive areas like energy, or tighter border controls. Moreover, Mexico has its own priorities and will not hesitate to adjust its position if an alliance with Canada threatens its own standing with the U.S. The meeting in Mexico City may last only a few days, but its significance